Before we get into the fourth episode, I want to talk a little bit about why I started this podcast. As an occupational therapy student and a practitioner who was working in different institutions, I never really felt occupation, different frameworks and models really resonate with my life and my experiences. And there felt like there was a disconnect in practice with the occupational therapy knowledge, and really not enough emphasis on providing culturally safe and relevant care. The episode that we're going to get into, you'll see that my guest is remaining anonymous for his own safety. And that's something that a lot of us take for granted. People of color are often persecuted, attacked, and threatened for being honest about their real life situations and experiences, for being honest about injustices that they've experienced and they've seen. As you listen to the episode, I hope you have an appreciation for the vulnerability and honesty that my guest has shared with us, in the hopes of making you a better practitioner, a better human being. Welcome to the fourth episode of the South Asian Occupational Therapy Experience. Today, we're going to explore the perspective of children of immigrants.
So I am a South Asian occupational therapist. I'm based in the UK. My family descends from India and Pakistan. I moved here about 50 years ago. I qualified 6 and a bit years ago, and I'm specializing in mental health. My pronouns are he, him, and his.
Thank you and welcome. I'm Sheila. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a first-generation American. My parents immigrated from India almost 60 years ago. I was born and raised in San Francisco, and I currently have a private practice in mental health and wellness. So before we start talking about children of immigrants, I wanted to just give a little bit of explanation of how we describe our immigration status. So first generation immigrant is typically what we call the first to immigrate to a new country. So you would have been born outside of the country that you're living in. First generation citizens are native born citizens. So typically it would be your parents that immigrated to this new country. And you could also be considered a first generation citizen if you immigrated at a very young age. And then there's 1.5 generation. So if you immigrated before or during your early teen years. So let's just get right into, how is your daily life impacted by being the child of immigrant parents?
I think first and foremost, people see my color, and they always. Now I've had this both in my professional work, with fellow colleagues and with OTs and with patients. Always literally appear to simplify their language, as if that I don't understand that. I have also been, being first generation, there's the pressures that you have. You have to succeed. You have to achieve the best. You have to do what you can because your family fought tooth and nail to make sure that their children were born in a safe country where they would have all the opportunities that they didn't. And so your life is all about study and work hard and learn all the skills and work that you require. And as an OT, those are very meaningful occupations and meaningful goals. But as a human, sometimes those pressures can be a bit much. And often we are passionate about that as South Asians. We see that as really passion driven. But then one thing that, a lot of my fellow Caucasian colleagues and that see is you're a know-it-all, or you're a geek, or you that's all you want to aspire to, um, which isn't the case. And it does leave you quite excluded because there's things that you don't join in on because you prioritize that exam you have the next day, or that assignment that you want to check over that one last time before clicking submit to make sure there's no errors. Um, but also there's the flip side of it, that I feel quite lucky that I'm here, having seen how my cousins and that grow up that weren't so lucky to grow up here. And at the same time, it's quite confusing as well because you want to um, have your own culture, but also fit into the culture that you've grown up in. But then there's the issue of how you're judged for having your own culture, the comments that are made to you. So, you know, a very common term that's often used is coconut.
Yeah,
You're white on the inside, but brown on the outside. Uh, I get that quite a lot. I also get quite a lot that, oh no, um, you eat curry and stuff, so you're Indian with your food, but when you eat fish and chips with us, you're white.
right.
Uh, or that, you're white when you want to be, but you're Asian when you want to be when it'll suit you. Um, so it's quite funny. Some of the things that people actually view you having a different skin color and different ethnicity as a positive, whereas you've grown up seeing it. This is a really bad thing because nobody will accept me and nobody does accept me. Um, and it's very hard for you to be accepted. So it's almost like you have to form a completely different identity um, to be around people that are Caucasian, or when you're around people that are Asian, you can't really truly be yourself because they see you as, oh, the kid that became westernized, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you've touched on, I think, all the points that I really want to get into today. And one of the first things you mentioned is the immense pressures that we have as children growing up. And I think one of the biggest differences to recognize with being the child of immigrants is our parents didn't have, and some of our parents still don't have anything to fall back on, right? They left everything behind, left everyone behind, came to this new country for a better life for their families, for us. And they had to succeed, right? Because they couldn't go back to their country for various reasons. Sometimes it's just shame, right? It's not even if they're escaping anything, but they can't go back to their country. They can't ask for handouts. They don't have anybody here to support them if anything were to go wrong. And I think a lot of that pressure ends up falling on us. Something that you mentioned to me before we started recording was that you are the first to have attended university, the first to have been able to buy your own home. And I wanted to see if you wanted to speak to some of those. There are definitely successes, but there are pressures to get to that point.
Oh, absolutely. And I think so, like the first to attend university and things like that, I grew up in quite an impoverished home. My family worked. I had a large family. Being the number five son of the eldest son in that family,
Mm,
um, my mum was the eldest daughter-in-law. She had to look after her nieces and nephews, so that that's how the hierarchy in an Asian family works, and the eldest daughter-in-law looks after all the children, even if they're not her own.
right.
Um, and so you know, my first reasons for studying so hard was because, oh, I need to make something of myself. But then as I grew older, it was like, I need to do really well so I can get a good paying job so I can escape from all of this, so
Mhm.
I can have a life that's about me, that isn't about, oh, I need to do this to help all of them. I need to do it for me. and that pressure that you end up putting on yourself, it's twofold because you want to do it for yourself, but you also want to do it to make your family proud and for them. You mentioned something about ashamed, and that's a big thing. This honor, we talk about honor-based violence, but we don't talk about honor-based pressures.
Right.
And I think one of the biggest things on, um, like you'll know yourself, on um, South Asian children is the whole pressure of you need to uphold the family honor.
Right.
You need to do this, that, and the other to make sure that the family honor is kept up, and that image that's portrayed in society. We've worked hard for society to even allow us to live among them here in Britain, so you need to make sure that you don't do anything to dishonor that, otherwise they might eject us. And part of that doesn't just come from this concept of honor, it also comes from the whole concept of, the old views of immigration, that if you did anything wrong, you would risk losing your status of British citizen or living here. Um, and even, so you have to do really well, you have to contribute to society, not just because you're part of that society, but so that you don't actually end up losing that privilege almost to be living here, rather than actually that right to live here.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, for me, those were some of those pressures, and I think it is a lot to do with the fact that, when I've achieved that, I've succeeded, uh, I remember going, and when I was really sick during my final college exams, and so that's like A levels. I think in the States that's probably like, it's not university, so it's you go
Probably
like,
high school just before you go to university.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. I remember I was sick. I did some of my final exams whilst I was really sick, and I ended up I was doing extra A levels compared to other people because I'd gotten like 100% in all my exams in the previous year. But I remember not doing as well, but still getting really high grades. And I remember coming home, and the first question that was asked of me was, "What happened to the rest of the grades?"
Yeah.
Um, and my response was, "I did these exams while I was sick, because I didn't want to sit another year in college." Uh, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're sick. Um, and you'll probably know that, when you've been sick, it's if you've got an exam the next day, we'll still stay up and study all night.
Right.
So that, and then when you go into the exam, you just have your hot ginger tea to
Yeah.
to get you through it.
You know,
So
one thing that you mentioned that really stuck with me is these familial expectations are greater than that. They're societal expectations,
yeah,
and if you trace back, especially the both of us, we have family histories of colonization, and so I'm in the United States. It's a little different, but being in the UK. Like you said, like being allowed to be in that country, we are finally seen as humans. We're finally seen as people who can be part of society. And so it runs so much deeper than just bringing shame to your family, but like really all of your people, who you represent based on your skin color, and um, going back to our countries of origin, we were dehumanized, and now that we're allowed to be part of society, we don't just want to be part of society. We want to show that we more than belong. We can do better. We have always been able to be equal or better. We just haven't had that opportunity, and so these expectations are, in my mind, they're threefold. You've got your family expectations, you've got the general society's expectations, and then you have your own expectations of what you want from life.
yep. And then there's let's just add another expectation on top of that. There's the Western expectation
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
society here that you forsake your Asian culture or your cultural background and not just integrate, but you assimilate a
Right.
white culture. And oh, hear this so much. Well, you've moved here, you've taken our jobs. Uh, why don't or your parents moved here, and now yous have been born and taken our jobs, so maybe you should be more like us. And I find that really horrific because it's actually quite reflected. I was talking to a few OTs that in the UK, and some of the things they told us is that they always try to hire somebody that reflects themselves. And I was just
Mm,
saying, so my view to them in response to them was, well, I get that, but you're white and female.
right,
I'm Asian and brown. I'm Asian and gay and male, and you're white hetero female. So does that mean that I'm not going to get a job if you were interviewing me,
right.
even if I was more experienced and more knowledgeable? So it's really interesting that, there is that pressure from Caucasian society to someone Asian. So it's like you're stuck then in limbo. Where do I belong? Where
Right.
am I? Which part am I is me? So yeah.
Yeah, and in being in different parts of the world, I think those pressures to assimilate are the same, right? Dressing a certain way, speaking a certain way, but no matter what we do, we are different. The moment somebody sees us, we're already different. We don't have to open our mouth. We don't have to show our degrees. It doesn't matter what we have to offer. We automatically don't belong. And unfortunately for us, we don't belong wherever we are, right? If we go back to our family's country of origin, we're not Indian enough, Pakistani enough, and where we are now, we're not British enough, we're not American enough, we're not Western enough.
Absolutely. And yeah, and it's interesting because it's like people say, "Oh, you need to just get over the racism thing. Nobody's racist anymore. You're
Right.
here, you're
It's
working.
illegal.
Yeah, yeah, it's illegal to be racist. You should just report it to the police." All right, cool. I'll ring the police, tell them that I've had somebody be racist to me, but the police will tell me, "Sorry, there's nothing we can do at this time
Right.
because we've got no physical evidence." And I'm just like, the evidence is there, but all it takes is somebody to deny that they've been racist.
Mhm.
Um, and who are their white friends going to stand up for? You know, um, it's like I've been on trains, I've been spat at, I've had racial slurs thrown at me, I've had patients be racist to me, and homophobic, and I've been told, "Oh no, you just need to accept that and then move forward because actually it's the same as when a patient says they don't want to work with a female
Right.
OT because they feel more comfortable with a male." And I was like, "No, that is not the same thing." Um, it is really not the same thing, and it's when people equate that to it. My argument then is, well, isn't that the same as me saying that actually, when somebody talks about violence against females, that actually there's violence against males as well, and detract from that? It's exactly the same thing, and it's and that doesn't get understood. Um, so it's almost like we've got this culture where there is feminism and equality, but the feminist the view of equality and feminism only applies when it's acceptable within the realms of a Caucasian society.
Yeah. And I mean that really is it. I think a lot of people aren't comfortable getting into it, but is it feminism? Is it an intersectional feminism or is it white feminism? And the reality is, where you and I live, it's white feminism. They aren't considering Black and Brown people, people that are trans or gender non-binary. It really is white feminism when you look at the historical roots and even what people are fighting for now.
Yeah,
And when you were talking about what the term that's used here often in workplaces is culture fit. People aren't going to say, "Oh no, I'm going to I'm going to be biased and only hire people that look like me, think like me, talk like me." They call it culture fit here, right? Are you going to fit into the culture of this workplace? And it's like, what is the culture of this workplace? And so the hardest things with discerning acts of racism and racial discrimination is it's implicit. I'm sure, I don't know if you actually ask that person, what does it mean? But they're not going to give you a straight answer. They'll tell you, of course, we'll hire you, right? But depending on what your name is and how it appears on a resume, or what they see, if it's a face to face interview, that is 100% going to impact, if you quote unquote fit in or not.
Absolutely. I was explaining it to one of my friends, and they weren't getting it. So I sat down and when we went to a bar, um, I went up and I was the first one there, and then a few white people came
Hmm.
up, and the barman ignored me,
Hmm.
served the white people, and then another party came and he served them,
Hmm.
and I've called out to him, I've signaled him, and then I just walked back to the table without any
Yeah.
drinks or food. And my friend's like, "Well, where's your drink?" And I was like, just this is what's happened." And they're like, "Oh, he probably didn't see you."
Right.
And I was like, and then afterwards, when I sat down and explained to my friend, because this is a friend who is really open minded and will, learn and understand when I explain things to them, that actually that's a racist microaggression.
Right.
And when I explained to him what had happened, he was like, right, okay, so that was racism. So he
Mhm.
took me up to the bar and he said to the barman, he was like, look, mate, my friend has been waiting for half an hour for you to serve him. Instead, you chose to serve other white people over him. You'll serve him now, or us and the party of 14 that have a table booked here that we're waiting for, we will be leaving, and that's at least £800 worth of service that you're going to lose out tonight.
Do we need people to keep doing that for us? Like, do we
We
really
didn't need
need
it.
people to keep saving to keep saving us and having to explain what actually happened?
Yeah, it gets old, and I'm sorry, but this is a fight that's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of
Yes.
years.
Yeah.
And it's only 60 years ago that the first black kid was allowed to go to a mixed school in the US, was it? And it's only 60 years ago that we started removing segregation, but it's only a few years ago that actually they were still paying slave owner families reparations for
Mhm.
freeing the slaves. Wow. If
Yeah.
if there's any example of white saviorness coming in our which is showing structural and systemic racism still in existence, those are just some examples. But then
Mhm.
it's like, let's add on top of the fact that I'm South Asian, let's add the fact that I'm gay.
Right.
You know, um, I'll never, I know for a fact I'll never fit in anywhere for being
Right.
gay. Especially, particularly in the LGBT community. Um, at least there's some South Asian communities where they are fine with it. They're like, all right, as long as you're not outwardly talking about it or whatever, it's fine. We don't care that you're gay, or that your partner's white. Um, but in a community which you would hope would have accepted you for when they themselves have been for millennia been discriminated against,
Right.
um, you're not, because I know, um, it's not, we've had it where me and my husband have gone out to a club and we've been told, "Oh, it's not your kind of people's night." I was like, "What do you mean?" It's like, "It's not a Bhangra night."
And if you don't know what that means, like Bhangra is a genre of music, and in the UK, I'm sure it's even more popular. And they have basically like Desi and Bhangra night. So yes, that is very racist.
Yeah. So I've had that, and
Yeah.
then then it's like brilliant. I tried to join an LGBT um, group at uni, and surprise, surprise, I was the only Asian guy there.
Mhm.
All of their nights were built around dressing up and drinking. I'm not a heavy drinker. I'll enjoy a drink now and again, but I wasn't one to go out and get absolutely off my face. Um, and yes, they'll say, but that's your uni culture. But at the same time, arranging all the LGBT activities around it isn't going to allow for inclusivity
Mhm.
or what's the most common phrase? You're so brave and amazing for being Asian and gay and coming. I was like, but I'm not being gay. I am gay.
100% of the time, the statistics will show you, if it's even being measured, that it is Black and Brown people within the LGBTQ community that are having the worst disparities in income and health and healthcare, access to healthcare, things like that. White LGBTQ plus people have better health, better access to healthcare, better treatment than those that have the intersectionality of being a person of color.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people are afraid of talking about it is afraid of talking about these things is because so let's put it this way: Asian people are afraid of talking about these things
Mhm,
to Caucasian people because the minute we do raise anything, you get arguments of, but we get racism as well.
mhm,
We're white and we get excluded, or
mhm,
we don't see color,
mhm.
or actually we're open to learning and stuff like that, but just don't call us racist. No, we're not saying that you're racist. What we're saying is that you have white privilege.
Right,
You are still not willing to recognize, and that and you don't recognize that some things you say are racist. And when they're pointed out to you, you instantly become defensive. If you don't become defensive and you sit down and ask us, explain to me how that's racist because I'm not understanding this, then of course we'll be happy to explain it to you, but we shouldn't need to explain it more than once. And it's then your duty to go and educate other people. You
yeah,
know, that's something that we don't have, and that's why we can't have those conversations. And on the
right,
flip side, I've got a lot of white friends that talk to me about racism, and we talk about it a lot, and we have those social political discussions. And one of the things that they say is that they're afraid of asking those questions because they're afraid of what if they offend somebody? And
right,
I was like, no, you're not going to offend someone. Of course, somebody's going to get passionate about it, and yes, they may get upset about it, but that's that person's responsibility, their reaction. If you're asking about something because you're concerned, but just think about, if I was just put yourself in the other shoes and see how would I feel about that if I was Asian and marginalized.
right,
So it's like that, and we don't talk about it because there are those fears, and there is the fact we live in a society where actually talking about anything instantly gets you judgment.
right. And I think you brought up two really important points. One, we don't like to talk about this, but just because you belong to a marginalized group or an oppressed group doesn't mean that you aren't capable of oppressing another group, right? Me as a brown person and I'm cisgender heterosexual, I am capable of saying something that is harmful to somebody that's in the LGBTQ plus community, even though I'm oppressed because of my race, right? And so we all do need to be inclusive and be thoughtful. But then the other part that you mentioned is this fear of saying something to offend somebody or doing it wrong that's keeping you from even learning, from keeping you from even trying, which I think it's worse. I think it's worse to absolutely do nothing, be okay with the status quo, than to maybe say something kind of stupid.
Absolutely. you know um it's like, talk about it, talk to
Yeah.
your friends about it and say to them, look, this happened. I'm not sure was that okay?
Right.
What should have been my response? Um, and I was like, actually, your response should have been like this.
Mhm.
It's like one of my friends. They were talking to me about their 10-year-old coming out to them, and she's a hetero straight woman, and she was like, I wasn't too sure how I should have responded, but all I said to them was, I'm not going to treat you any different, you're still my kid.
Mhm.
And I was
Mhm.
like, yes, that's great, but you should also have affirmed to them that yes, being gay is an absolutely okay identity.
Mhm.
And that person was completely fine with it. They were so accepting and open minded and listening of it. It's having those discussions that open it up. But I mean, like going back to the original point of, you know, race and ethnicity and being part of a marginalized group and experiences, I think those experiences, we're talking about them right now.
Right.
And yourself, we're seeing it in the media. Um, People will say if it's a black person that's not, you know, that's getting, or an Asian person that's getting shot and whatever. Oh, well, why did they confront the person? Why did they confront the
Right.
neighbor? Or why did they
Right.
cause that? Why did they have the argument with them?
Just
Uh,
comply.
yeah, why didn't they comply and just keep the head down?
Mhm.
Um, okay, right. Well, that's fine. Right. Okay, that's fine. But then the next minute you see a white person doing exactly the same thing. I know they had mental health issues or they were having a really bad day.
Right. Yeah,
All right.
it's a double standard. We have to behave a certain way to stay alive, and we are villainized. We're called terrorists. We did something wrong when we're the victims.
Yeah.
Whereas you're humanizing, the white domestic terrorist.
You mentioned something about healthcare access.
Mhm.
Um, I live in a society where we have social medicine, where it is socially funded and welfare funded. Um, but then let's look at access and the lack of education. As an Eastern person, um, I, have to use the model of human occupation.
Mm.
I have to use assessments and tools that I've been told that are to be used,
Right.
which are selected by heterosexual Caucasian individuals higher up within our profession, because they are the best standardized generic tools that are applicable to all. No,
Even though
they're
they were
not.
normed on white people.
Yes. So
Yeah.
let's look at social skills within the moho. Being independent, being able to look
Mhm.
after yourself, being not too overly involved with family and friends, and respecting privacy and boundaries. All right, Sheila, you tell me, in the South Asian culture, right? India or Pakistan, right? What boundaries are there?
Yeah, none.
None. If your mum tomorrow broke her arms or whatever and she needed you to attend to her personal care, you'd be doing it,
Right, and
right?
I do, and, like, yes, no one gets it. Friends don't get it, therapists, mental health therapists don't get it, no one gets it. You drop everything because your family comes before yourself.
Absolutely. Or your family is you're in okay, I'm gonna Americanize my terminology here. You're in the emergency department and you are anxious and the doctor's talking to you, but your family is answering for you. You would feel absolutely comfortable for them to do that, wouldn't
Right,
you? Because that is how it works in Eastern families.
right.
Um, but the minute an OT or the minute I'm assessing that on the Moho,
Mhm,
family is over involved,
mhm.
restricting the person. So you would score poorly on that part of the Moho scale, right? The model of human occupation screening tool. Um, but yet that's an unfair rating because that's not reflective of your cultural social values and your norms, right?
Right.
So it's like that, and
And you're being
uh,
judged for those results. I mean, the language that is being used to document isn't neutral language. We think it's neutral language, but it's judgmental language.
yep, absolutely. Um, and it's interesting. Even let's look at like how depression and that presents in Eastern families compared to Westernized. If you're not cooking or cleaning or things like that, it's just like, okay, well maybe they don't want to, they can't cook or clean, because not every woman in the West cooks or clean,
Right,
right? But you and I will know that in the Eastern culture, well, I'd hope most Eastern families, they teach their kids, whether they're boy or girl, cooking and cleaning, right?
Right.
More so the girls, because that's what was a tradition, but
Mhm.
that's shifting and it's more both genders are taught you both cook and clean because everybody helps out in the family.
Right.
Um, and the minute you're not cooking and cleaning in the Eastern culture, oh no, it's fine. It's not really a symptom of depression. It's just, that's the norm. And I'm like, no, but it's not their social norm.
Right.
So actually, it is a symptom of depression here. Um, the fact that they're attending to their personal care is, because that is part of their faith and religion.
Mhm.
That doesn't indicate that they're not depressed. That indicates that they've still following their faith and religion. Um, so it's all these kind of things that I sit there and as a clinician, I sit in despair when I get a patient that's been seen by Caucasian clinician and so many symptoms have been dismissed and I'm sat there and I'm like, no, what is happening here? Where's the inclusivity and cultural awareness here? And then when you do try and raise it, you're seen as disruptive.
You know, not even just assessments, just occupation in general. When you think of the OTPF, there's the mention of like choice, motivation, and meaning. And it's, I often put that in the context of like racism affects it, but really culture as well. There are certain things within our culture that you really don't have a choice. It's not based on your motivation. And sometimes there really is even no meaning. Like that's just obligatory. um,
Yeah,
kind of going back to those expectations. Some things they're just mandatory. We have no choice but to do them. You mentioned even personal hygiene with religion. Like we have to be clean and pure to participate in those rituals. So regardless of how we're feeling emotionally, you just kind of have to do it. And so some of the terms that are used in mental health are like high functioning, or if they're not doing it, they're not compliant. And it's like, no, that doesn't apply. Those are judgmental terms. They don't really reflect what's going on in somebody's actual life and why that's happening.
yep, absolutely. So then it does make you question about the inclusivity in
Yeah.
healthcare.
Yeah. I mean, it's not. If you look at who everything was modeled on, especially just standard medicine, it's the white male body, right? All these norms and standards are on the white body, or
Yep,
a white person's occupations, and that really doesn't reflect not just South Asian cultures, but really anything that isn't that white Western dominant cultural representation.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like this is a tough one because it's like, okay, how do what's the takeaway for practice? And there's no simple solution to this. I'd like to hear kind of what your thoughts are on how do we start shifting this mindset of, we really, as OTs, regardless of where we're practicing, we have this like, there's one way to do it. There's one right way to do it. How do we shift away from that?
We go back to the very fundamental of occupational therapy practice, which is person centered holistic care. We go right back to that. We say that, yeah, right. So I detest it when I see therapists call themselves, oh, I'm person centered. I do
Right.
meaningful goals for the client because actually, what's important is for the patient to be able to wash themselves and eat and drink. Like, but those are just basic goals that you're doing to fit the whole model that you're using. That's
Hmm.
not person centered care. That's model centric care, which is the approach of medicine. Medicine is all about fit the patient's symptoms to the right diagnosis and give them the drug to treat it. And that is not the approach we should be using in OT, which is what we've become. And actually shift right back to person centered care. So if I ask you a question, Sheila, what is person centered holistic
Yeah.
care? What would you say?
Well, as a South Asian, first generation American, person to me is more than just myself, right? If I am the patient, um, my family is part of this, especially when I think of my parents are elderly. And so I am the one, especially I'm the one speaking for my dad because he has dementia and his language skills are regressing. He's been in the United States for 60 years. English has been his primary language, but now he doesn't understand what his doctors are saying, and they're not taking the time to get a translator. They're not even taking the time to make sure he understands what they're saying. And so I'm speaking for him. So when somebody is practicing person-centered care with my dad, they have to consider myself, my mom, and anybody else who's in the household or providing care. So just the word person means so much more in my culture than it does in others, right?
Right. So if we move right back to person-centered holistic care, we are not just looking at the person, we're looking at the environment, we're
Hmm.
looking at what is meaningful and what they define as an
Right,
occupation,
right.
right? If we look at somebody who is LGBT, coming out is an occupation for that person
Hmm.
because it's something that is meaningful to them. If we look at somebody who is Middle Eastern, right? So, your mum, your grandma, your dad, even, and your granddad, when they make tea, they make it on a hob, right?
Hmm.
With loose tea, spices, and some herbs, and they will do that, right? And when you're making chai, you have to bring it right to the boil, so it's about to boil over, but it doesn't quite boil over, right?
Hmm.
Okay. So when somebody is assessing, I came across this case when I was training. Somebody was assessing a patient. They said, "We need to assess this patient for making a cup of safety of making a cup of tea." Um, Patient walked in and saw kettle, microwave, and mugs and tea bags. Patient just stood there, didn't know
Right.
what.
What am I going to do with this?
She just filled the cup with water and drank the water, right? Because in
Yeah.
the Eastern culture, it doesn't matter what you've got there. If you want a drink of water, you just fill whatever you've got there to drink water. Um, the patient was marked down as very risky in the kitchen and not able to complete tasks because they lacked cognition of planning, sequencing, and completing tasks. I had to then educate a clinician, and I was told off because I wasn't a clinician, I was a student,
Mm,
right? So interestingly, that was interesting experience for me, and it made me realize, okay, I'm in a white person's world right now,
right.
training to do something that white people do. I need to be more white and British and not question.
The most dangerous things there, you mentioned several issues with assessments, is that we are basically calling people dangerous or minimizing their ability to do things based on the Western way, right? Because we think
Mhm.
there's one right way to do it. And if you're doing it differently, then it's wrong.
Yeah,
And I think that's the biggest problem. You're talking about the kitchen, and I'm thinking just myself. I use my hands for almost everything. I'm turning I'm turning hot tortillas around, um, and I can't feel it in my fingertips because I've been doing it since I was a child. That's probably dangerous because I should be using a utensil, but that's how we cook, right? We cook
yeah,
over an open flame. We touch things that are hot. We don't use too many utensils. And that's how we do it. It might not be considered safe in the Western culture, but that's our culture. That's how we do it.
absolutely. And eating with our hands as
Yeah.
well. We eat with our hands, you know?
Right.
Um, it's like ridiculous that you're then you're judged for eating with your hands, and it's like that's not hygienic, blah blah blah, etc. You're not eating right, and I was like, okay, it may not be hygienic because we have a culture, in your view, but before we go and eat, we have a whole ritual of washing our hands,
Right.
making sure that we don't touch anything except for the implements that we are serving food out of, or the plates and things like that. And there's a whole ritual of where we, lay the mat down on the floor so that our food isn't coming in contact with the floor. And
Right.
we sit, all of these rituals and stuff
Right.
that we have as part of dinner. Like, if you think back to when you were a kid, remember, like, it would take a good half an hour to get stuff ready for dinner to be eaten, you
Right.
know? I remember that. I remember all of that, and I remember then the food being brought in, and it would be my mum, or whoever's been cooking, bringing it in and putting it in the middle, because then it's for and then everybody was told, "You need to go wash your hands and everything, and come and take, plates and stuff, and go sit down, ready for eating." It's like we've forgotten that actually it's not, that person-centered care. It's what that person is telling you their
Right.
life like, rather than assuming, that actually a bed bath is sufficient for somebody who's Middle Eastern. It isn't,
Right.
because actually a bed bath does not leave me feeling clean. I remember I had a microfracture on my foot, um, a few weeks ago, um, and my husband was just like, "It's all right, just, you can't stand in the shower and
Mhm.
stuff for too long, so why don't you just have a wash at the sink?" And I was like, "No, I don't feel clean, and I don't feel able to do anything throughout the day until I'm clean."
And the last episode of this podcast, we talked about religion. And so there's cultural component, but there's a religious component. I mean, if you're not able to properly clean yourself, you can't even participate in those religious occupations, because there are rules. You have to be clean. And I think it goes beyond just South Asian culture. If there's something you've been doing for decades of your life, you want to be doing you want to be doing that again. And so, any of those accommodations that you're making really have to include the person. It's not what you, the OT, thinks is the best way to make the modification. It's really what's important to the other person.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like that's when it comes down to the day-to-day impacts of
Hmm.
being first generation here, born from my ancestors, and actually growing up here, and the cultural impacts. It doesn't just impact me on those wider areas where I experience racism and I experience exclusion, but it affects me when it comes to my healthcare, when
Yeah.
it comes to my well-being, when it comes to all of these things. And I think it's brilliant that, like, my husband understands now that actually
Mhm.
how important it is for me to have a wash. You know, I had really bad side effects after I had my first COVID vaccine, and I couldn't. I was so dizzy for a few
Mhm.
days. But my husband knew how important it was for me to feel clean, so he was supporting me to get over the shower and have a shower and things like that, because he knew that that would give me that slight bit more quality of life whilst I was so sick.
Right.
Um,
And something that seems as meaningless as a shower can have way more meaning than you recognize.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is that whole concept of actually cleanliness helps you
Mhm.
clear your mind as well.
Mhm.
And it's without having that cleanliness, like, how are you able to then commune with other people and commune with God, or commune with yourself, because you're not clean minded, you
Right.
know?
Yeah,
It's like,
way deeper than just a shower.
absolutely. So, yeah, it affects me on an absolutely day to day basis.
Mm.
And, like, even things like, you know, um, washing dishes. Um, I don't put my dishes in to soak in a sink and then wash them and then just rinse them off, I don't do that. I can't just scrub them in a sink of water and then put them out to dry. Um, they need to be scrubbed and rinsed and put to dry.
Mhm.
Uh, they, and air dried because it's more hygienic. Because using a cloth to dry dishes, you're getting germs on that cloth and then putting them back onto what you've just washed. Um, but like, some of my friends think it's weird that when I have dinner parties and they come over and I made food and then afterwards I'm washing the plate straight away because it's not in my culture to leave plates there and let the food dry and get hard and just
Right.
put them in soak, and it's I need to scrub the plate straight away, clean them and put them to air dry. Um, Again, it comes down to that whole cultural value, and the meaning of that behind that is that actually everything is clean and all of my environment is clean and clear, so it means that I can focus and I can enjoy my interactions with my friends and relax.
Right. I this is a side note, I will say as an adult, um, I got a dishwasher and I like it definitely it was a transition and I think many Asian cultures we aren't used to using dishwashers. It feels wasteful. And there's just the traditions of hand washing and it has just changed my life. I haven't had anyone over in over a year, but I'm ready to have them over and use that dishwasher again.
Yeah, yeah. We are currently getting our kitchen redone, and I'm getting a dishwasher.
Yeah,
But I've already said to my other half, but if the dishes don't come out sparkling,
right.
um,
Yeah,
we're
I
not getting
still
back.
kind of wash my dishes before I put it in the dishwasher because I'm so used to washing my dishes a certain way by hand.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so this is a big question. You have learned to maintain two cultures, right? So you are um, first generation UK citizen. So you've had to assimilate, learn the language, learn how to dress, learn how to act, to be, for the most part, accepted by British society. And you have your South Asian culture that you've been able to maintain, including language and customs.
Yeah.
And you clearly bring that into practice with you. And unfortunately, the examples of you advocating for, clients from different backgrounds hasn't been the best. But to me, it seems simple. If you're able to maintain two cultures, and that helps you provide better patient centered or client centered care. How are people that don't have this experience? If you are brought up with just one background and it's hard to understand it because you don't have that lived experience, how can that translate? Um, how can people be more broad-minded, maybe even put some of those normed assessments to the side, and really provide that true patient-centered care that takes culture into account, that takes more than just, I think of it really as a binary. We're so used to things just being this way or not.
So, my answer before of we need to go right back to the
Yeah.
basics of person-centered holistic care. The bread and butter of any occupational therapist is activity analysis.
Hmm.
Before we had these models and things that we would sit there and complete an activity analysis, right?
Yeah.
When you're studying to be an occupational therapist, the first tasks that they teach you is about activity analysis and how to, you have the psychological, the cognitive, the social, the cultural, the environmental, the
Hmm.
physical, the activity itself, the meaning. You have all of these factors, amongst others, to consider, right? When you do an activity analysis.
Right.
If you want to be more diverse and aware, um, I have a friend who's lives in England. She's an occupational therapist. She's Irish, but she spent a year going to lots of different shops, Eastern and all of that, to learn about the different cultures
Mm.
and to learn about how we shop, the things that we do. She also got involved in the kitchen with me to see how we cook different things,
Wow.
how we deal with the fact that we're crying and when we're chopping so many onions to make a masala, and how we, in between chopping different veg and stuff, we're washing our hands constantly
Right.
because that's how we avoid getting chili in our eyes. And
Right.
that's how we don't wash our hands when we've kneaded the dough for the chapatis and we roll the chapatis out, and that flour that sticks to our fingertips acts as a barrier from stopping our fingertips from getting those third-degree burns.
Mhm.
Um, she learned all of that. If somebody who is in her late 30s, so a mature OT, I hope she won't kill me if she hears this, um, is willing to learn that, what's to stop any other OT to go out and observe other cultures or ask other cultures to learn from it? When you are learning to be an OT, you don't know about, models or practice or activity analysis or anything like that. You learn it from them, from
Right.
the OT. So if we viewed those tools as the culture within OT, what is to stop us from then going and learning the culture and values and skills of others' ethnicities and backgrounds? I'm, I grew up learning 6 Eastern languages. In my brain, I think in Punjabi. Um, I'm translating it to English
Mhm.
right now in my head. I had a linguist who basically who assessed me and was like, "You have like some like it's like a 0.36 second delay of
Hmm.
translation from Punjabi to English." Um, because up until the age of 6, I was speaking Eastern languages.
Right.
But then when I was a kid, I was told I'm delayed development because I wasn't speaking
Mm.
until 6, 7 years of age because I didn't know how to respond in English to some
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So
You and I are in the same boat. I spoke Bangla and Urdu before I spoke English. So I didn't learn English until I started school, even though my parents spoke English. Coming
yeah,
from India, you learn English in school. But yeah, I mean, I think, I'm going a little off topic, but that's a huge deal. You're telling parents that their children are developmentally delayed because they actually have too much language skills. And, you're a polyglot now, right?
yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
sure your language is likely, well, not likely, is more advanced than most of the people that you're working with,
mhm,
practitioners.
yeah. And the interesting thing here is that when we then look at it right back to the original question, how can Caucasian OTs or OTs not of that culture learn to then be able to identify with other cultures?
Mhm.
What about all those international OTs and international nurses that come to the UK and learn to assimilate and identify to
Right.
the Caucasian culture here? They do it. They do it by observing, they do it by asking questions, they do it by listening, and they do it by asking those questions. What's your routine like? What do you enjoy doing? What is important to you? How do you wash? How do you get dressed?
Yeah. I think it boils down to being humble and recognizing that there isn't one way, there isn't even a right way, right? It's the
Uh-huh.
individual's way of doing it or the community's way of doing it.
Absolutely. You know, it's like um it's like my husband won't make a curry, um, because he knows that if he makes a curry, even though he's trying to be nice and do something that he knows would be meaningful for me in that meal, he knows that actually I won't enjoy it as much because one of the skills that, you learn when you're cooking Indian food is how to layer flavors,
Mhm.
how to layer spices, and how to get the most out. Why do you not fry certain spices first, and why do you steam certain spices? All of that, right? Skills that take years to learn. Um, but he learns, and he has been learning, and you know, he's he's now able to assist me when I'm making chapatis or dosas and things like that, because he knows what to do with those there and what color does it need to go before the chapati's done. So when we're talking it right back to actually being humble and willing to learn,
Mhm.
um, he taught me how to make a shepherd's pie, you know?
And not have
Um,
it taste like South Asian food.
yeah, yeah.
Because we
Um,
tend to do that too sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's our
"Oh,
palate.
okay, we'll add a bit of garam masala to this
Yeah.
because it's a bit bland, or we need a little spice, so let's just add some chili powder." Um, but, it's like that. He taught me how to make Welsh cakes,
Mhm.
you know, but my Welsh cakes aren't as good as his because it's something he's learned from his childhood. And yes, they're not as good, but they are improving because I will continuously try again, and will ask questions and will want to learn. And
Yeah.
that's all that needs to happen. That willingness, what you just said, that willingness and acceptance that actually, yeah, as an OT, even I'm limited in certain areas. And as a non-white OT, there are things that I won't understand about Caucasian patients. And I will ask them those questions and ask them to explain it to me.
Yeah.
There's a saying that my grandma used to say, sometimes the best teacher is yourself. And that is yourself being the person who asks the questions.
Yeah. And, you know, even just outside of occupational therapy, food is like my heart is in food and food is in my heart. So, thinking about food or just culture in general, it enriches life even more if you are aware of different ways to do things. Again, going back to food, eating differently, right? We eat with our hands, so the sensations increase, right? It's a whole experience eating food.
Mhm.
It's not just for nourishment. And so, I think your life expands, your view on life, the possibilities are really limitless when you're willing to have that open mind and be curious and learn.
It is just about that, being that
Yeah,
curious to learn. Like food is so important here. So I think it is a massive part of the Eastern culture as
yeah,
well,
yeah,
because you know, whether it's Diwali or Eid or Christmas or whatever in India or Pakistan, you have a massive feast. And if you see that somebody's house's cook fires aren't lit that day, you'll notice the community will go around with lots of food to that person's house, won't they?
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's more than food. It is community. It is a communal experience.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, so again, it's like that whole thing of cultural view that,
Hmm.
you know, I'm always open-minded with when when I'm when I'm working with somebody with depression, I will ask them, when's the last time you really enjoyed your meal? Like really sat down. What was the last thing you really sat down and enjoyed and it made you feel real joy? And when they tell me, I'd be like, great. So why don't we try and make that in our next
Yeah.
kitchen session?
That's a beautiful question to ask, and you know, hopefully it translates. But me just hearing that. makes me think of how valued the person you're working with feels, right? How seen
Mhm.
and heard they feel, which is a very different experience than most healthcare providers. So, that little bit of extra time to get to know who you're working with means more trust, better rapport, better outcomes.
Absolutely. And when we're defining outcomes, I think we need to define it in that cultural context.
Yeah.
So for somebody, it may not be about, it may be about, yeah, I really enjoyed this meal because it was quick to prepare. Um, but for somebody else, it may be, I, you know, for me, it would be, I really enjoyed a biryani because it takes over a day of preparation. I have to cook the different curries the day before, and then I cook the biryani the next day. And it's the labor and effort and the love that I take in preparing it that makes it that much more enjoyable and meaningful to me.
Right. And yes, I appreciate you pointing that out. Outcomes doesn't necessarily mean they were able to do X, Y, and Z independently and they've met their goals. An
Yeah,
outcome for an individual can mean more meaning in their life. And to me, that's more powerful, especially in, South Asian culture. We don't really care about putting our socks on by ourselves
mhm,
independently. That's not as important as living your life with your family in your community and doing the things that are meaningful to you.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, are there any last things that you want to add or bring up?
So I think one thing I just wanted to briefly talk about is being a gay OT
Mhm.
and I suppose coming out. For me, it wasn't a positive experience coming out to my family. I don't have any contact with them anymore. But I
Okay.
think then one of the biggest things that I find is that one of the biggest hurdles that I had was I struggled to get any support for my sexuality growing up. And I sit there and I think to myself sometimes, if on a form it had said, optional, what's your sexual orientation?
Hmm.
When I saw the OT for anxiety when I was about 12 years old, uh, I would have written down gay. And they would have spoken to me about that and identified that actually, you know, this kid is really struggling with their sexuality. Um, and yet, still to this day, I think I know of maybe one or two places that have got sexual orientation on their occupational therapy
Hmm.
initial assessment. Um, and I think that that's a bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think, and in OT, I've spoken to some OTs about it, and I've been told, "Well, no, because then you're forcing someone to out themselves." And I was like, "No, you're giving them the option to say,
Yeah.
I'm gay or I'm not gay." And actually, the more positive experiences that they have of disclosing their sexual and gender identity, the more likely they are of having better resilience, better coping strategies, and knowing that there are more safe spaces out there. I did my research on that. That was what I did my research project on. And yet, but still to this day, there is such a lack of evidence base in this area.
You're giving somebody an option. I think that's the issue. It's just like if you have race as a category in your intake paperwork, some people might choose not to fill it out. But if you aren't asking those questions, you are ignoring a very important part of somebody's identity. That is who they are.
Yep.
And we touched on this earlier. For you, just like you mentioned, there are two sides to it. It's the Western side, where between your sexuality and your race, you felt excluded, and then on the family side in our culture, usually if if you're not that um, the standard heterosexual, which is kind of like the white norm, right? That's what's more commonly acceptable in South Asian culture. You have to hide that part of you, and thank you for sharing with us. That's tough. Not only did you did you not feel supported on the Western side, but you lost part of who you are with your family as well by opening up, to who you are.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's like that whole thing of,
yeah.
when you talk about it like that and you talk about it to friends,
Mhm.
or people or anybody, I'm open about it. I will
Right.
discuss it because I want to educate people that actually they grew up in a culture and a society where being different was wrong,
Mhm.
and they experienced that themselves. So anything that's different from what's an acceptable norm
Right,
is wrong.
right.
And when people turn around and they say, "Oh, no family should react like that," or blah blah blah, and this like that, and actually, why couldn't you just, oh, well, you're safe here and things like that. I'm
Right,
just like, no, that's the wrong response.
right.
The right response is for you to sit and listen and for you to
Mhm.
acknowledge that actually, as a society, we've got a long way to come.
Right,
And what can we do to start working towards that? And one of the things we can do is not be forcing people of different cultures to accept and have to change the very fundamentals that make up their culture.
right.
Um, I've had people say, "Oh, you must be so glad that you're you've escaped all of that side." And I was like, "What do you mean escaped? That
Right,
culture is part of me."
right.
And the whole homophobia and everything was actually did not exist. Homophobia and transphobia did not exist in the Middle East because let's go back millennia. You know, look at all the carvings on Mughal,
Mhm.
in Mughal palaces and pre British Empire. They are books and carvings which actually celebrate transgender and homosexual individuals. Um, but yet the context of homophobia and transphobia came from religion and
Yeah,
um, British Empire
yeah,
as a form of control,
yeah,
because it did not fit with those views.
right. Yeah.
Um, but
Homophobia, ableism,
yeah,
racism, they all fall into that category of going against that white dominant norm or white, call it what it is, white supremacy.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Um, and it all comes down to that of actually don't ask me to adjust who I am. Don't tell me that me being passionate is overconfident. Because actually how passion is displayed from Eastern culture is completely different to
mhm,
how passion is displayed in Western culture. Um, and people when they say, "Oh, calm down, you're getting a bit too excited," or whatever, I'm like, "No, this isn't being too excited. This is being happy and positive and not um, stereotypically British restrained." Because that's what is acceptable in the society.
yeah,
So we have to. I just want to bring just before we wind up. I just want to bring one point back, which is for all clinicians of color, different gender, different sexuality, and who are Caucasian. If you're hearing this and you're thinking about what can I do to improve my practice, or how do I want to practice, I want you to think about two things. What does person centered care mean to you? And how are you defining what's meaningful to you? Reflect on that for yourself and reflect on your experiences to see, was that conversation meaningful that I had with that doctor? Was that meaningful to me? Did it account or with that OT or with that speech and language therapist or that physical therapist? Um, and actually, was it a holistic representation of who I am, where I'm from, and what I am? And when you're thinking about discussing what occupation is, and actually in terms of sexuality, I want to put this out there, disclosure or coming out is a very meaningful occupation. If you have to do something every single day, whether it's in a small way or a big way, and it's part of who you are, and without being able to be who you are, you cannot meaningfully engage in any activities of your daily living, then that is a meaningful occupation to that person. Engaging in those discussions at work, for one example, when you're saying, "Oh, I was at the park with my wife this weekend and we went for a walk and it was really nice. What did you get up to this weekend?" I don't want to have to say, "Oh, I went for a walk with my other half or my partner."
Mm.
I want to be able to say, "Yeah, I went for a walk with my husband
Mhm.
and it was great." In that one sentence, I've just come out to you as gay, but I've done it by trying to make it more normal and acceptable because society tells me that it's not normal and acceptable. So make it so that, and that in itself is a meaningful part of me. It's a meaningful occupation. So think about those things when you are reflecting on your practice, on the practice of others, and when you're looking at how can I improve my practice to be more inclusive? And hopefully that will help you be able to think about those things. It's what I do anyway, because there's cultures that I don't know much about, and I go out and learn about them. And I think I was fortunate enough to be able to travel and learn about those cultures by immersing myself in them. So, yeah,
Yeah, thank you. Those are really, really good considerations, and it definitely brings back all of the points that we covered in, you know, being colorblind is not helping anybody. Ignoring somebody's sexuality is not helping anybody. If you truly want to be inclusive, then you have to be curious and make space for somebody to share their identities and feel comfortable. And so you do have to check those microaggressions, really kind of check your biases, and check how you're stating things so that somebody doesn't feel like they have to cater to what you believe is acceptable and how they're sharing their life.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciated having this conversation, and thank you for getting into really personal aspects of your life. I wanted to just share my information if anybody wants to get in touch, if you have questions, if you have any suggestions for future episodes. You can find me at otbayarea.com. Please like and comment if you have any questions or feedback for us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you inviting me and reaching out. And it's been quite enjoyable and interesting to hear from your perspective as well. And that things across as they say in Britain, across the pond are not so different to
No,
here.
unfortunately, they're not. We've got a lot of progress to reach towards together.